Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We'll just wait a couple of minutes before getting started. So I think we can start now. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar on triangular cooperation at the European Space Agency. We are recording this session and we'll share the recording and presentation after. So this is a part of a series of webinars under the ESA Global Development Assistance Monitoring and Evaluation activity, which are hosted by Caribou. We're essentially today going to be exploring how ESA uses triangular cooperation to bring satellite Earth observation into real development decisions. Mainly looking at two partnerships, the United Nations Office on South-South Cooperation, and then with the Climate Funds. There'll be a sort of central anchor question throughout today on what does ESA do to help its development partners use satellite data better. And so joining me today are three panelists. We've got Jasmine Gilma from the European Space Agency, who will set the scene on triangular cooperation and how ESA's partnership model has evolved over time. We will then hear from Dumitru Vasilescu from the UNOSSC, the United Nations Office on South-South Cooperation, and who will walk us through why the UNOSSC chose to partner with the European Space Agency and what the demand from member states actually looks like. We will then hear from Alex Schune, also from the European Space Agency, who will explain a little bit about how ESA has been working with climate funds to use Earth observation to make faster, more confident decisions. I myself, my name is Carlotta Maucher, and I'll be hosting today's webinar, which will include a Q&A session at the end. So please, if you do have any questions, you can use the chat or the Q&A box. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pass on to Jasmine.
Thanks a lot, Carlotta, for the introduction, and so welcome to this webinar. I hope you can now see my screen. So I would like to start off with highlighting why it is important that we try and use this data and share the Earth observation data that we gather at ESA. So we now have a lot of essential climate variables which we can use to inform development decision-making. And this data is now available at a global scale and also with a high revisit frequency. within the Copernicus Sentinels, which are funded by the European Union, the data is publicly available. So this means that everybody in theory can access this data. However, this data comes in a raw format, and then sometimes interpreting this data can present challenges. So it is important to know that all of these satellites have different purposes. For example, you can use Sentinel-1 for flood monitoring, but also for earthquake damage detections, and Sentinel-1 to monitor agricultural change, just as two examples. What we're trying to do here at ESA through the Earth Action Program is to translate this raw Earth observation data that we receive with those satellites into decision-ready-made information, which can then help government agencies, but also development partners to anticipate change and reduce risk. So this can be related to climate change, for example, and trying to predict floods, but also to manage natural resources more such as aquifers, and then inform smarter and more efficient practices that can be carried out. But also, this information can be used to anticipate potential scarcities and highlight future challenges, such as drought forecasting. So I thought this was an interesting graph that I would like to highlight here, which shows that actually there's quite a lot of percentage of the value of Earth observation, which has not been unrealized. Whilst this is a graph that demonstrates this in an economic standpoint, this also leads to other considerations, that there's a socioeconomic gap which needs to be addressed due to the structural barriers, which then often impede the translation of this raw data into operational useful services. And this can be limited due to technical capacity or limited awareness of the EO's analytical potential, but also sometimes because of the absence of standardized methodologies which prevent Earth observation indicators to be integrated into workflows. And perhaps also to point out an additional example, in agriculture, the barriers now related to integrating this with equipment and softwares that farmers use. So this really highlights that whilst it is already adopted, it needs to be further mainstream to have its full potential. This leads us to why, for us, it is very important that the data that is freely available through the Copernicus program is now, there's growing awareness through knowledge development. And then also this knowledge is adopted and the skills are transferred through programs such as the GDA program, where we work directly with development banks and country stakeholders to integrate Earth observation into their workflows. So this is a quick summary of how the ESA GDA program, or the EO program in support of international development, has changed throughout the years. So this is now a partnership with development banks for almost 20 years, where we started off demonstrating EO services to raise awareness of the types of data which are available, which we then progressed, once we've had good awareness, to build capacity within those institutions on Earth observation data, but also to move beyond small-scale demonstrators and towards a larger integration of these Earth observation capabilities into their workflows. And now we're at a stage where we are mainstreaming the use of EO more in various workflows. So for example, in vulnerability mapping and in risk management, Earth observation is now a crucial part that is almost always integrated. Now, to speak a bit about how we collaborate with actors such as UNOSSC and ourselves. So we have different understandings of triangular cooperation. So for UNOSSC, triangular cooperation involves Southern-driven partnerships between two or more developing countries supported by a developed country, or multilateral organization to implement development cooperation programs and projects. And here at ESA, we look at triangular cooperation more broadly because for us it is necessary to work with universities for developing your algorithms and testing new solutions. But then also it is important to create this link between the governments and country stakeholders to these research organizations so that there's a connection between the demand, but also what the needs are for policy making. And then thirdly, we use private sector Earth observation companies to work together with implementing agencies and IFIs to mainstream Earth observation more broadly. So now I'll quickly run you through how this collaboration looks, particularly in the Global Development Assistance Program. So quite often it is generally a demand-driven request where IFIs request a specific EO services, which they then can inform to provide evidence to justify particular investment cases and monitor the progress of these. ESA then brings the technical expertise through the European EO sector and works together with the IFIs to co-design the best EO solution that will be able to address these investment cases and monitor what's required. Through this design cycle, there are multiple iterations where then also country stakeholders and client stakeholders get involved, which leads to the delivery of this EO information to IFIs and client stakeholders, who then ensure that the sustainability is carried forward through internal capacity building, but also with working together with client stakeholders to transfer this knowledge. So, and in order to use and fully engage with different stakeholders over the time, we have expanded our partnerships to reach, starting from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, to different actors. So this has led to collaborations in over 80 countries where over 130 projects have been supported with 96 EO capabilities and projects ranging from looking at transport infrastructure to food security. And finally, I would like to highlight the UNOSSC partnership and why this adds to our collaborations and why we consider this to be important. So especially for this partnership, we're able to directly engage with the national stakeholders, and they're able to express their policy demands, which we can then work with and to identify the relevant EO capabilities that are needed to address these concerns. Additionally, there's a collaboration between the national and technical stakeholders and between these national institutions, which we can use to build capacity between the different countries involved in these triangular cooperations within the UNOSSC triangular cooperation framework. And thirdly, we can then provide information for those countries to increase their evidence base to inform their policy and decision making. And with that, I would like to finally show you an excerpt of our Knowledge Hub, which you can use to explore the different EO capabilities also at offer that can be used to inform policymaking. And with that, I'll pass it on to Dimitri, who will tell you more about the specific UNOSSC engagements that we've been working on.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Jasmine, thank you. So from our side, I also prepared a few slides, but before going into it, I would like first of all to thank the European Space Agency colleagues of the GDA program for the very fruitful collaboration that we started about 1 year ago. And I would also like to welcome to this webinar a few colleagues that I saw on my screen from the national institutions. I saw a few colleagues from the government of Turkey, for example. So welcome on board for this discussion. From our side, from the Office of South-South Cooperation, we in partnership with the European Space Agency, we have these maybe 4 to 5 kind of objectives in mind, right? So first of all, for us, what is important, I think Jasmine just mentioned it, I think one of the primary objectives is to respond to the demands, to the needs expressed by the member states when it comes to the exploration and use of satellite Earth observation data for evidence-based policies and decision-making processes, right? So we would like to, through this collaboration, to make sure that we are able collaboratively to respond to these needs when it comes to data, to technology, to algorithms, and to the implementation capacities. And that should be, of course, in line with the demands from the member states. And because we are working a lot with the least developed countries, the small island states, the landlocked developing countries, and with MICs, of course, we want to anchor this support to the member states in those frameworks of for instance, of the Antigua and Barbuda plan of action for the SIDS, the Avaza program of action for the LDCs, the Doha program of action for the LDCs, and so on. So that's key for us. The other, of course, aspect is about how do we connect in a fast manner, in a qualitative manner, the expertise that is in the European Space Agency, right, and the industry to the national priorities when it comes specifically to some of the most pressing development challenges, right, that the developing countries are facing around climate resilience, climate change, disaster risk reduction, urban planning, infrastructure, and overall the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So therefore, the objective is to make sure that we are able to connect it in a fast and qualitative way. Of course, as I mentioned, it's not only about making some of the data, or all of the data and the technology and capabilities available, but it's also to make sure that the data, right, and the capabilities translate into very specific decision-making tools for policymakers, right, for planning purposes and for investments purposes. We, from our side, from the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation side, we, of course, we are ready and able to support on the brokerage side, right, to link the existing capabilities, right, with the plans and the opportunities when it comes to South-South and triangular cooperation, and to generate this very important also transfer of knowledge and experiences between the countries, between the developing countries, right? And that is, I think, one of the interesting elements of our support, our collaborative support to the member states that I will elaborate a bit further. Last but not least, of course, we would like, as part of this partnership, right, with the European Space Agency, we would like to position satellite Earth observation data as a practical enabler, or as a practical trigger for the implementation of the very important intergovernmental mandates, right, and also nationally owned development priorities. So with these elements in mind, we launched at the end of last year a joint call for expression of interest, right, for the member states to to express their interest on how they see the use of satellite Earth observation practical, right, for their specific national priorities and national development challenges. So what we were looking at in these expressions of interest, and we received actually very interesting, a set of very interesting expressions of interest. We are looking actually through those expressions of interest for very specific elements. So for instance, I put here on these slides a few areas that are of interest, not only for us and for the European Space Agency, but also for the member states, right, in the context of triangular cooperation. So first of all, we want to see clear thematic relevance and relevance to the national priorities, right? Be it on the climate resilience front, urban planning, any areas that are of national priority for the participating member states. Of course, another important element is the national ownership, the institutional ownership by the governments, right, or mandated agencies. So we would like to really see how this support actually responds to the real with policy operational needs, and what is the level of institutional ownership. That is critical, we believe, in order to make sure that this is not only about some demonstration project, but it's also about developing the capacities and making sure that this is a longer term engagement. Of course, another element is the applicability across multiple countries, right? I mentioned it before. We were looking, and we are looking at how can we best connect governments around specific capabilities, so that there is also an experience for these governments, not only to develop their capacities, but also to make sure that there is an exchange in between governments on some of the good practices, lessons learned, and so on. So connecting multiple countries, 2 or more countries, right, around some of the shared needs and demands, I think it's also critical for us, and we look at that element as being extremely important. Clustering, of course, we created for the purposes of this exercise, we have already created 3 thematic, broadly speaking, thematic clusters, right, whereby we have 2 or more countries and national institutions from those countries that are ready and willing to exchange knowledge, to exchange experience, and to focus also on replication of some of the good practices from these countries, rather than just treating these as purely demonstration projects. And of course, last but not least is this alignment, as I mentioned, with some of the policy frameworks when it comes to the different groupings, right? Be it the priorities for the small island states, developing states, landlocked or least developed countries. I can also give here just one practical example. We've created a cluster on urban growth and land systems and infrastructure, in which we have a national institution from Turkey and one from Colombia, right? And this is a very good example, I think, that actually shows this, on one hand, a strong demand for Earth observation data and experience, right, around the broad topic of urban growth. But it also shows a strong capacity, right, and institutional readiness from these institutions, and also it shows clearly that there is how this experience, right, is going to be relevant from the policy making perspective, how this is technically feasible, right, because there is already, of course, some very interesting capacity in these 2 countries, in these 2 governments, right, to use Earth observation satellite Earth observation data. We also believe that this specific cluster will enable us to support governments in terms also of sharing some of the methodologies for urban growth mapping, land systems analysis, urban resilience, right, and infrastructure risk assessment. And of course, what we would like to be able to achieve ultimately is to have some, let's say, reusable, or maybe a better term would be scalable good practices, right, and some of the policy lessons and some very practical peer learning exchanges and pilots that we can then promote further in the countries of the global south and north. Maybe also important to highlight a few elements around the future engagements that we are planning in between our office and the European Space Agency, the GDA program. Right? So we first of all, of course, we would like to expand on the capacity development front. We are seeing a very strong demand from the member states and from the permanent missions here in New York of the member states, a very strong demand to understand what are the possibilities, what are the capabilities, the existing capabilities, and how this can be best used for development purposes. So therefore, the plan is to come up with, additionally to what is, to the information that is extremely useful on the knowledge hub, right, that Jasmine shared before, we would like to also introduce a few additional learning modules for the policymakers, and to make sure that there are some deep dives into through specific thematic modules in the future. That's one. The two, of course, we are ready to share some of the good practices, the case studies and data sets, right? And make our knowledge sharing platform, the South-South Galaxy, and the Global Alliance on South-South and Triangular Cooperation that we will be soon launching, making these platforms interoperable to some degree, right? And making sure that there is a flow of good practices, between these platforms and across borders. We would like also to develop, if there is demand, of course, from the member states, we would like to also try to develop some innovative, some new pilots to respond to some concrete demands. So, and for that, of course, we look forward to have further discussions with the member states, right, during the upcoming events, including the high-level political forum, the General Assembly, the COP31 that is coming up soon, and other major avenues where we can concretize the demands, right, from the member states and come up with some new and innovative pilots. I briefly mentioned about the Global Alliance on South-South and Triangular Cooperation that we are planning to launch in September. We want to use this alliance actually as a platform to connect the demand for satellite Earth observation data and knowledge and the supply of it through matchmaking. So we will be soon inviting the member states, right, to join us in this, and all the partners also on the call to join this Global Alliance, because we believe that it can further intermediate and brokerage, right, the partnerships on this very important domain. And last but not least, as an office, we have a very interesting mandate. We work with all the UN entities, with the entire UN system, through what is called an UN interagency mechanism. We have focal points on South-South and Triangular Cooperation from all the UN entities, but also we are inviting IFIs and other knowledge partners, including from the private sector, right, to support the scaling, the financing, and the policy uptake, in this case of satellite Earth observation data and existing capabilities. So we would invite, of course, our partners in the European Space Agency and GDA program and other partners on the call to join us in our efforts to promote and popularize the satellite Earth observation data and its use through the interagency mechanism and through other platforms that we manage. I will stop here and very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much, and back over to Charlotte. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dumitru, for that presentation and overview of UNOSSC and the ESA. We'll just hear now from Alex, and he'll speak a little bit more about the partnership with the Climate Funds, particularly through the ESA GDA program. On to you, Alex.
Thank you, Carlota. Hello, everyone. Good to be here today. And indeed, I will be talking about the triangular cooperation that we have with the Climate Funds and their implementing agencies. So there is a specific program or project or activity that we use actually to implement this cooperation and collaboration, which is the climate adaptation and finance activity under the Global Development Assistance Program. And that's, let's say, not the only, but the main vehicle we use to kind of power up this collaboration. And the goal of this activity is ultimately to collaborate with the Climate Funds and their implementing agencies on the integration of EO technologies, both at strategic and project levels to tackle climate adaptation challenges. So what makes it triangular, this cooperation through this activity, is that we essentially partner with the climate funds, but aim at mainstreaming Earth observation through the climate funds and their implementing agencies in beneficiary countries, right? So it's ESA collaborating with the climate funds at the strategic level and with the implementing agencies at the project and program levels eventually. So this is how this is framed. What that entails is different types of actions, because at the level of the climate funds, there's a need potentially to support them on the definition of an Earth observation mainstreaming strategy. There's a need to raise awareness regarding their activities, maybe through webinars, workshops, knowledge events, in order for Earth observation and satellite technologies to be taken into account in the programs and in the definition of the strategy, and eventually also to develop tailored training material that will feed broader rounds of trainings that those same climate funds provide to their implementing agencies. Then the second level, the level of the implementing agencies, which is essentially the project level, is where we will have approaches that are, of course, much more tailored to the specific needs of the project and of the stakeholders and beneficiary countries of those projects. So that entails support to the development of proposal, how Earth observation can inform the proposal and the investment plans. That entails also the development of fit-for-purpose EO products and services that will support the implementation and, let's say, targeting or tailoring and guiding eventually the activities that are being deployed on the ground. And also, of course, always keeping in mind that this should be done with a clear path for sustainable adoption. And for this sustainable adoption, working at both the level of the implementing agency and liaising with the climate funds is crucial, because this is where we can eventually link the project level to the program and the broader strategy, climate finance strategy, and therefore have something that is not, and that will not die just after a project, but that eventually goes beyond this, and that can be offered to the implementing agencies in a more structured and strategic way. So in order to implement those different actions, especially when we go at the level of the implementing agencies and the projects, we try to position Earth observation and its potential at the different steps of the project cycle. It's very much already upstream when we essentially use it to inform the policy dialogue and potentially national adaptation plans, because it helps to identify and quantify the current state and trends in climate risk, and it offers consistent and broad spatial coverage that allows to inform eventually the state of climate risk in the country, and therefore to inform those plans and the broader strategy for the country. But then it trickles, of course, down directly to then how we design a proposal, as I was mentioning, by generating data that can be used for the climate rationale, for the vulnerability assessment, and that will therefore strengthen the proposal of the implementing agency in the country to access climate finance. So that Earth observation has a huge potential to, let's say, strengthen those proposals and ease and facilitate the access to climate finance. And then, of course, when we come to implementation, it's about designing potentially services and products that will help gear implementation in a more impactful and efficient direction. Then going to the monitoring evaluation part by using Earth observation to eventually evaluate, first monitor and then evaluate the impact of the operation and the project. So in a sense, Earth observation data can be fully integrated in the project of the implementing agencies and support through each step of the project cycle, right? And that's really the value that we can get from it. That's the value that's being offered to the implementing agencies, and we're working together with the climate funds to ensure that all implementing agencies can take advantage of this opportunity eventually. A few more examples here that I wanted to highlight, concrete ones, which essentially illustrate the way we've been working with the climate funds. So when I say that we engage strategically with the climate funds, it can take different shapes and forms. But one first thing that we're really trying to do is to somehow build a community across the climate funds with focal points that know about Earth observation and that can help us essentially gather knowledge and share knowledge about Earth observation within those institutions. We try to kind of animate and facilitate these communities through webinars, but also by, for example, hosting the global platform for sustainable cities, the Sustainable Cities program of the GEF, organizing webinars with the Adaptation Fund or the GCF, and potentially organizing in-person events, which we're planning actually for the end of the year, to gather people